Tenebrae means darkness. And since the 12th century, in some form or fashion, followers of Jesus have been worshiping just like this, an extended retelling of the passion of Jesus through the words of Scripture. That's not passion like, oh, I love you so much sort of passion. It's the word passion that comes from the Greek word meaning to suffer. In a sense, this worship service is like a vigil or a wake, almost like a funeral. And so it is that we sit together for worship on this Good Friday to hear the story again, and we're glad that you're here with us. We would encourage you to set aside the busyness of life for a moment and to find some quietness as you worship, to carve out some time for meditation, for reflection, and for gratitude, for deep listening. Perhaps, as we extinguish candles here in the Centrum, you might find in your own home a way to grab some candles or perhaps a lamp that you can dim over the course of our time together in order to make the space that you're in holy ground. If you've been worshiping with us for the past few weeks, you note that in some ways tonight is the night towards which all of our reading has been pointing. Each story whispers the name of Jesus, God in flesh, who comes to make a new covenant with us by water and the Spirit. This covenant that God is making with us is built on the consistent and persistent posture of God toward us, on the nature and character of God over the course of time, since the very beginning, and on the hope that even though we regularly renege on our end of the deal, default over and over again, that God remains faithful over and over again. Consider these words that God shares with Moses in the wilderness, in the book of Exodus. While the people of God are in open rebellion against God, while we were still sinners, this is what God says about who God is. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and yet by no means clearing the guilty. Moses, at the words of God, bowed his head towards the earth and worshiped, saying in part, I pray that the Lord will go with us from this place. Although this is a stiff-necked people, pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance. And God's response, I hereby make a covenant. Thanks be to our covenant-making God who chooses to love us.
How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that He would give His only Son to make a wretch His treasure. How great the pain of searing loss, the Father turns His face away, as wounds which mar the chosen ones bring many sons to glory. Sin upon His shoulders, ashamed I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that held Him there until it was accomplished. wounds have paid my ransom. What should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart: his wounds have paid my ransom. But this I know with all my heart: his wounds have paid my ransom.
The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand. Immediately, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him there was a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priest, the scribes, and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." So when he came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. Then they laid hands on him and arrested him.
Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, in whose house the scribes and the elders had gathered. But Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest. And going inside, he sat with the guards in order to see how this would end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for false testimony against Jesus, so that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last 2 came forward and said, "This fellow said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days.'" The high priest stood up and said, "Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" But Jesus was silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I put you under oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so, but I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your verdict?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and struck him. And some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who is it that struck you?" Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard. A servant girl came to him and said, "You also were with Jesus the Galilean." But he denied it before all of them, saying, "I do not know what you are talking about." When he went out to the porch, another servant girl saw him and said to the bystanders, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." Again he denied it with an oath, "I do not know this man." After a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, "Certainly you are also one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to curse, and he swore an oath, "I do not know the man." At that moment, the cock crowed. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said, "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus in order to bring about his death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate the governor.
So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" After he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no case against him."
What wondrous love is this, O my soul, O my soul? What wondrous love is this, O my soul? What wondrous love is this, that caused the Lord of bliss to bear the dreadful curse for my soul, for my soul, to bear the dreadful curse for my soul. What wondrous love is this, O my soul, O my soul? What wondrous love is this, O my soul? What wondrous love is this, that caused the Lord of life to lay aside his crown for my soul, for my soul, to lay aside his crown for my soul.
Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and striking him on the face. Pilate went out again and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no case against him." So Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die because he has claimed to be the Son of God." Now when Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. He entered his headquarters again and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have the power to release you and power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin."
After mocking him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. They compelled a passerby who was coming in from the country to carry his cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Then they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his clothes among them, casting lots to decide what each should take.
When the story gets dark, we think it cannot get any darker, and then it does. Jesus goes from adoring crowds to one of his own turning him over to be arrested, to telling his friends, his family, that they will abandon him. They say, "No way, we will die with you." But ultimately, they are not the ones hanging next to him. Jesus has been betrayed by his closest people. I wonder if he felt abandoned or alone as they divided up his clothes, casting lots right in front of him for his things. I think we all likely know what it feels like to be betrayed, to be let down. Maybe you even know the intense loneliness that can follow a betrayal, feeling like you have been stranded and disoriented by all of it. I wonder at what point in time his friends knew it was all over. At what point in time did they know it was not worth it to get involved? I wonder if Peter was surprised to hear himself say that he didn't know the man. He didn't even say that he didn't know Jesus. He called him the man, not even being able to bring himself to say the name of his dear friend. I wonder what it was like for Jesus to ultimately come to terms with the fact that the pain was worth it. At what point in time did he fully grasp the bitter disappointment of being abandoned, beaten, and murdered by the very ones that he came to save? I wonder how painful it was for Jesus to embody covenantal love for the people that were killing him. I wonder what Jesus was thinking about as hot pain filled the wounds of the nails and pumped through his body. As Jesus was nailed to the cross, I wonder how God felt. I wonder if God remembered Abraham. I wonder if God remembered Abraham walking up to the mountain with his son Isaac, the son that he loved, the son he had prayed for so fervently. I wonder if God remembered Abraham trembling with wood and with fire, trusting that God would make a way out of no way. I have to believe that God remembered. Because on this night, God knew that pain. On this night, God showed us just how costly, just how risky love is. I wonder how Jesus' mom was feeling. The crosses are not nearly as high off the ground as we picture them to be now. Would have been just out of reach for Jesus' mom to have wiped the blood off of his brow to keep it from stinging his eyes. So close that Mary could have almost reached out and touched his face. So close that he was just one step from the ground. So close to the freedom that the ground would have brought. Could Jesus have taken that step? Absolutely. But in doing so, it would have been costly all the same. Doing so would have meant that power would still have rested in the hands of those with weapons intended for destruction. Doing so would have meant that control would have remained in the seats of those who sit on thrones of selfishness and hoard food and supplies while others die from lack of basic provisions and care. Dominance would have lingered on the lips of those who demean and devalue, who lie and who turn people against them for their own gain, who make some other into others in order to own them. Friends, because Jesus chose to stay, because Jesus chose to hurt, chose to die, that story changed forever. That narrative of dominance and power changed forever. Because Jesus stayed, death no longer has the last word. Finally, because Jesus chose to stay on that horrible cross, finally, the promise of shalom was on the horizon.
O love divine, what hast thou done? Immortal God hath died for me. The Father's co-eternal Son bore all my sins upon the tree. Immortal God for me hath died. My Lord, my love is crucified.
It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified 2 bandits, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, were also mocking him among themselves and saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now, so that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also taunted him.
Is crucified for me and you, to bring us rebels back to God. Believe, believe the record true. We all are bought with Jesus' blood. Pardon for all flows from his side. My Lord, my love is crucified.
Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home.
When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "Listen, he is calling for Elijah."
After this, when Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, in order to fulfill the scripture, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was standing there. So they put a sponge full of the wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
Since it was a day of preparation, the Jews did not want the bodies left on the cross during the Sabbath, especially because that Sabbath was a day of great solemnity. So they asked Pilate to have the legs of the crucified men broken and the bodies removed. Then the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he already was dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. He who saw this has testified, so that you may also believe. His testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth. These things occurred so that the scripture might be fulfilled, none of his bones shall be broken. And again, another passage of scripture says, they will look on the one whom they have pierced.
After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, though a secret one because of his fear of the Jews, asked Pilate to let him take away the body of Jesus. Pilate gave him permission, so he came and removed his body. Nicodemus, who had at first come to Jesus by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing about 100 pounds. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with the spices and linen cloths, according to the burial custom of the Jews. Now there was a garden in the place where he was crucified, and in the garden there was a tomb in which no one had ever been laid. And so because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there.
Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, Were you there when the sun refused to shine? And sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, and tremble. Were you there when the sun refused to shine? Were you there when they laid him in a tomb? Were you there when they laid him in a tomb? Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they laid him in a tomb?
The Good Friday Tenebrae Service is one of my favorite services that we do here at FVUMC. The simplicity and the power of hearing the Passion narrative read as a complete body, hearing songs that invite us into deeper meditation, and the extinguishing of the candle that slowly darkens the room. This service ends with the extinguishing of the Christ candle, the last candle which beckons this entire room into utter darkness. It's a haunting image as we leave this worship space, a space whose sanctuary and hallways are filled with the laughter of children, the greetings of friends. Not on this night. We leave this place in darkness and in silence. We leave this place thinking of Christ's sacrifice for us. And rather than moving on out of the grief as our culture is prone to do, no, we sit in this darkness. We contemplate what the disciples must have felt after Jesus' death as they scurried in dark alleyways to upper rooms where they locked themselves in out of fear for their lives. We remember the emotional and spiritual darkness they must have felt that Friday night and that Holy Saturday, feeling all hope was gone, feeling that the end of the road was here. Jesus' story was over, their hopes crushed. We leave this service in silence and in darkness, remembering Christ's love, remembering God's love for us, God's covenantal love, a love that is sacrificial, a love that takes Jesus even to the cross, a love that costs God everything, a love for you and a love for me. And so wherever you find yourself this evening, if you have candles that you've been lighting and extinguishing during the service, I invite you to extinguish that last candle. And if you're in a room, I invite you to turn the lights off, to sit in darkness for just a moment. Wondrous darkness, thinking of the wonders of God's love that took Jesus to the cross. You are dismissed in peace and silence and the everlasting love of God.